welcome to the opening debate of the Edinburgh TV Festival. Thank you very much to Broadcast for supporting this session. It is, of course, very good to be with you all this morning. As you can see, the title of this session is "The Future is Now, TV's Place in the New World Order." And the festival's asked me to do a couple of things before we meet our esteemed panel. First of all, to check in what I said last year about the industry, a bit like marking your own homework in front of a room of expert markers, but I've taken that on. The second thing is I've been asked to identify some of the key moments since we last gathered, and I think I've got 12 minutes to do this, so let's see what I can do. Now, this time last year, I highlighted 4 shifts. The first was a shift in consumption. What people watch and where they watch was fundamentally changing. It still is. For example, in 2024, YouTube overtook ITV, became the second most watched service in UK homes. That's after the BBC. Here's the data behind that. If we look on the left, there's the BBC on 19%, YouTube on 14%, ITV on 12%. But if we go into the data, among 16 to 34-year-olds, YouTube was the most watched service. And Ofcom sees a clear direction of travel. It's saying if content from the PSBs is going to survive, it has to be discoverable. It goes on. That means forging commercial and strategic partnerships with platforms and not treating them like the enemy. That shift in consumption continues at pace. The next factor, that was the globalization of British TV. And have a look at this for 2024. Here we have the top 6 global TV content providers: Netflix, Disney, Comcast, Google, Warner Brothers Discovery, and Paramount. For the first time, these 6 alone account for over half of the total global content spend. And of course, that has consequences for the UK. In 2023, inward investment in high-end TV made in the UK, well, that stood at 72%. Last year, it was 82%, worth in the region of £750 million more. In many different ways, for better or for worse, UK TV is ever more directly affected by the global TV industry. The third shift I mentioned last year was advertising's digital transformation, and that is definitely only going one way. Last year, linear TV ad spend fell 2%, video on demand advertising rose 26% year on year in the first half of 2024. And let's have a look at ITV's half-year results for this year. Digital advertising revenue, it's up by 12%, by £26 million. Advertising revenue overall down by 7%, by £65 million. Digital revenue continues to go up, but it is struggling to counter the fall in linear revenue. My fourth factor, well, that was the centrality of technology, especially to distribution. Let's again look at the numbers. This year, the BBC spending £88 million in the region of $118 million on online and TV development. That is a significant increase in that budget. But here's Netflix. In 2024, it put $2.9 billion into R&D, including into new search and recommendations technology. That's almost 10% up on the previous year's figures. Broadcasters are, of course, very much committed to their own VOD platforms, but as you'll all know, there is fierce competition, and those broadcasters are now having to decide how much of their content they want to put onto platforms like TikTok and, in particular, YouTube. The best technology is ever more vital to getting your content to audiences, and that is still exerting significant strategic pressure. All of these 4 factors are still crucial to understanding this industry, but what about the last 12 months? Now, you'll have your thoughts on what the most significant moments were. For better or for worse, I've chosen 5. The first comes on the 19th of December. Beast Games launched on Amazon Prime. This was the most expensive reality show ever made, with the biggest cash prize of all time, all built around a record-breaking YouTuber. And yes, Beast Games was beaten in the international ratings by programs that were cheaper to make, amongst others Love is Blind and The Circle. But Beast Games is coming back for at least 2 more seasons. This was the creator economy, making itself felt in the mainstream as never before, and surely it is just the start. Our next moment was on the 20th of January. Donald Trump became American president again. Now, as you'll know, his hostility to businesses involved in news in particular is long-standing. recent months, Mr. Trump sued ABC over alleged defamation. ABC settled for $15 million. He sued CBS over the editing of a Kamala Harris interview. CBS owner Paramount Global, major TV player, settled for $16 million. After a Wall Street Journal article, the president is suing parent company Dow Jones and its owner Rupert Murdoch. So far, no settlement there. President Trump prides himself on being different, and this is definitely a different experience for US media, especially those that produce news. That's relevant to UK TV in a range of ways. For example, President Trump's been very critical of NPR and PBS. He accuses both of biased and partisan news coverage, which of course they reject. He's withdrawing all $1.1 billion of federal funding. And here's why that matters to UK TV. PBS has a co-production deal with BBC Studios. It's resulted in over 250 hours of premium content in the last decade. Channel 4 also has a long-standing partnership with PBS. Needless to say, the loss of federal funding raises questions about how these partnerships will work. Now, Donald Trump's hostility to sections of the media is not going anywhere, nor is his unpredictability. He sees that as a strength. But it does make things unpredictable for US media and for anyone who does business with it. My third moment, well, that came on March the 13th. Adolescence was released on Netflix to huge critical acclaim, and the ratings followed. It became the first UK streaming show to top the weekly British ratings chart. Globally, within 3 months, Adolescence was the second most viewed English language series on Netflix that there's ever been. Wednesday's #1, in case you're wondering. Adolescence was a UK cast, a UK production, a UK story, but it wasn't on a PSB. It was on a US-owned streaming platform. And Wolf Hall director Peter Kuzminski told my BBC colleague Katie Razzle, the BBC or ITV would wish to make Adolescence, but let's be absolutely clear, there is no way they could make it at the moment, he said, because the cost of making it has increased radically, directly as a result of the streamers coming and making their programs here. No one disputes that, he said. The Adolescence writer Jack Thorne also spoke to the BBC, arguing the broadcasters could have made it, but it would have been a slightly different version of it, because of cost. And there is no dispute that costs are rising, and that UK broadcasters are spending less on high-end TV. Spend on HETV fell by 25% year on year in 2024. The lessons we should draw from Adolescence are contested, and we'll discuss it in a minute. But it brought to the fore questions about how to turn the best British stories into the best and most high-impact television. So 3 moments there for you: Beast Games, President Trump's return, Adolescence. 2 more for you. Number 4 is about Channel 4. On the 21st of May, Channel 4 announced plans for in-house production. Its creation, as I'm sure many of you know, in 1982 was in part to stimulate and grow the independent production sector. Now, with this announcement, it was becoming a supplier in competition with that sector. The new division, we were told, would help Channel 4 invest in intellectual property ownership. And then CEO Alex Mahan offered some reassurance, saying, Indies will always be the lifeblood of Channel 4, and this new direction is an essential element of our strategy to underpin the long-term sustainability of Channel 4. Not everyone was convinced. Wayne Garvey of Sony Pictures Television was direct. It won't work, he said. Channel 4 doesn't own IP and has no knowledge of how to run it. He went on, it could be potentially disastrous given Channel 4's limited resources. Needless to say, Channel 4 begs to differ. But this moment and the reaction to it, it highlighted the vital importance of IP, but also the difficulties in the indie sector. And let's look at some of the numbers. In 2024, total revenues earned by UK production companies grew, only by 1.4%, but that's worth £49 million. International business was crucial to that growth, because look at the revenue from UK commissions, down by £1.74 billion. And that's having consequences across the industry. According to Beck2, 7 in 10 screen industry workers are struggling financially. The issues in the production sector go deeper than the relationship between Indies and Channel 4, but this announcement of Channel 4 Productions highlighted the pressure that both are under. Now, the 5th and final moment I wanted to talk about came on the 27th of February. The BBC's chief content officer, Charlotte Moore, announced that she would step down. 2 months later, Alex Mahan of Channel 4, then CEO, did the same. 2 pivotal roles would be changing hands at a pivotal time. For the BBC, there is an awful lot at stake, and it has a story it wants to tell. Charlotte Moore in September said, "Our digital transformation strategy is working." As evidence, the BBC announced that iPlayer was the fastest growing VOD service in the UK. On Christmas Day, more good news came. The BBC achieved the whole of the top 10 of the most viewed programmes. But for some, there are reasons for concern, in particular when we look beyond linear. Here's the most recent data for total viewing, video viewing for individual services in British homes. So this is everything: TV and video, short, medium, and long form. That recent data shows iPlayer on 4%, Netflix on 8%, YouTube on 14%. All of this is relevant as the Charter renewal approaches. In a speech in May, BBC DG Tim Davies said, "When it comes to funding, we're not asking for the status quo. We want modernisation and reform." But he went on. But in doing so, we must safeguard universality. That universality, as the BBC will acknowledge, means making content that is relevant and popular across our society. And now leading the BBC's effort on this will be Kate Phillips, who's replaced Charlotte Moore. The decisions she takes will be crucial as the BBC heads into Charter renewal. As for Channel 4, well, we wait on who will be its new CEO, but the challenge is no secret: establish a new business model away from linear advertising. Channel 4 says its fast-forward strategy is working towards that already. Its digital revenue is up to 30% of total revenue last year. But to some, fundamentally, the situation doesn't look viable for PSBs as a whole. Sir Peter Bazalgette, the former chairman of ITV, said, "We don't have a strategy for their survival. It's that serious. Mergers may well be part of the answer." Or Lord Vasey, the former culture minister, said, "The UK only has room for 2 domestic broadcasters." Needless to say, that is not universally accepted. But the very structure of public service broadcasting is in play as these new leaders take the reins. Their decisions will have a major bearing on the future of PSBs. So those are 5 moments. There are, of course, many more. This year has given us much more detail on where the industry is heading, and lest there was any doubt, it's shown the speed and scale of the challenge this industry is navigating. Thank you very much for listening. Well, that is as far as I can take it, so please join me in welcoming our panel. Ben Zan, documentary maker and founder of Zanland. Bryony Hopkins, head of production and operations at Strongwatch Studios. Fiona Campbell, controller of youth audiences, BBC iPlayer. John McVeigh, OBE, chief executive of PACT. Louisa Compton, head of news and current affairs and specialist factual and sport at Channel 4. And Simon Heath, CEO and creative director at World Productions. Good to see all of you. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. I just want to start with this issue of the importance of international funding into the TV industry, because some people would say, well, this is fantastic, money is flowing into the industry, what not to like. Others would say, but more and more we are losing control of the financial underpinning of this industry, and that leaves us exposed. Simon, how do you feel about that?
I think the risk is that in the chase for international funding, it fundamentally affects the kind of stories we can tell. Because we had a golden period where the UK licence fee was topped up by the international market. So in drama, we were able to make quite expensive dramas for the PSBs by basically getting US pre-sales, co-productions, and across Europe, Australia, and so on. And some of those shows performed really well, and that was fine. But as costs have grown and the licence fees from the UK broadcasters hasn't grown, we've ended up with a situation where that deficit can't be plugged. And so we're in a situation which resembles much more like the feature film world that exists, where you can have a green light from a UK broadcaster and you can't get the show made. And then what happens is producers like me go, well, okay, what kind of things can we get made? And you start changing the nature of the shows you're trying to make with more than half an eye on the international market. And I think that's risky because you stop making shows like Adolescence that do so well here.
Fiona, do you see risks?
I think this underlines the important role of the BBC in this country, and to all the jobs that everybody here in this room creates and supports and looks to support in the future. The BBC is the biggest content commissioner in the country, and we all rely on its future and its good funding position to come. Undoubtedly, times are challenging, and difficult conversations are had week in, week out. Everybody in this room will be party to those. I would say we are becoming increasingly flexible and more open to new partnerships. New conversations are opening up with European broadcasters. There's always new paths to pursue, but it is undoubtedly challenging.
But most of the money that comes into the industry from abroad comes from the US. Does the situation in the US feel more unpredictable, feel less reliable than perhaps it once did?
I think what we've seen is obviously streamers prefer to keep dramas, hold the IP, fully fund themselves, hold the IP for their own platforms globally, which affects, the license position that the BBC would have had. So it remains challenging, but the BBC is committed to telling stories and scripted stories from right across the UK, from the likes of Blue Lights. And we get those stories made, and those stories have huge economic impact in the nations in which they're made.
John, I can see you wanted to come in.
Yeah, I think we're sort of talking about drama, and quite rightly you set off there, because that's where the streamers do invest a lot of money. And it's good, they're investing in British stories, it's new money, it's $1 billion a year, mostly to indies, comes into the UK. That's great, that sustains jobs, facilities. But I don't think we should be blindsided by this just being about drama. It's about all genres. All genres are facing challenges closing their finance because license fees are not keeping pace with the inflation that we've experienced, which isn't just down to the streamers. Anyone remember Liz Truss? Well, we've had a 25% inflation in the UK economy since 2020. So, of course, labour wants more, facilities want more, everything costs more. And that means it's harder to get things made. We're not the only country experiencing these changes. Every other European country and North America is going through the same. So the sources of finance that we used to be able to tap into to close the deficits are drying up. And that's a fundamental problem. I bless the BBC for doing what it can, but we're not getting enough money on the licenses to be able to make the shows to this quality and close the finance to get the shows made quickly enough to compete.
But if those concerns about finances are there, Louisa, that means that more and more of the most important decisions that impact the UK TV industry are potentially being taken by people outside the country.
No, I don't think that's right. I mean, we're taking big swings in drama in 2026 as part of our fast forward strategy. We've announced we're doing one drama a month, and we're not sitting around waiting for international co-pro money. We've got big writers like Jack Thorne, Stephen Mossett, Russell T Davies in 26. And I think there's an acceptance from them that they get the big budgets for streamers. We're not paying that kind of money, but they'll do it for a smaller budget for a PSB. And the other issue I wanted to flag is, as you said, it's not just about drama, it's about all genres. In current affairs, the cuts you mentioned earlier to PBS, an assault on journalism. But the other thing we're seeing from America is also like a cautiousness from broadcasters. The Trump effect is hitting real, and we're feeling this cautiousness in what they're commissioning. And that is a worry, but also why I'm incredibly proud that Channel 4 is still investing in public service journalism at a time when arguably we need it most.
What about you, Ben?
I mean, as an independent production company, like, we are inherently global in how we see the world, because it's the only way you can make money. So I think there's opportunity in pitching literally anywhere people have money to put into content. I think we have to see it as a bit of a sliding scale. There's certain things we pitch to, say, Louisa or Fiona at the BBC. There's certain things we pitch to Netflix. There's certain things we try and make ourselves. It, without a doubt, shifts the type of stories we make. If we're pitching to Netflix, there's a very defined type of story that we can tell for them. But at the BBC, it's the same.
But I can't let that phrase you've just used pass. You say it's the only way we can make money is to look globally. So the UK industry in and of itself is no longer enough to sustain a business like yours?
Definitely not. No, definitely. I think I'd say the TV industry in both the US and the UK alone currently, for a company like ours that is kind of blending the worlds of digital and linear and branded. None of those individually can keep us surviving. You know, we need like multiple revenue streams. Whether that's, you know, like today we've announced that we're making our own YouTube series called Human. That's one aspect of it. We're doing some stuff with Louisa at the moment. That's in the kind of digital space. And so it's like you have to look literally everywhere you possibly can to make money, which is partially just running a business in the first place. But yeah, none of these individually would keep us alive.
And Bryony, your business specialises in digital content. Presumably it inherently has a global perspective on its business model.
I echo Ben's point completely. We're a production company that focuses just on digital. And to Ben's point, we have to look everywhere. We have to have a diverse portfolio of revenue income streams from different models across the business and fundamentally where that money comes from across the globe for our global audiences that we're serving on the platforms. Predominantly YouTube is what we work on. That is how we have to survive as a business. And we pitched to Fiona and we've pitched Channel 4, and that is a really important part of our business to maintain those British values and those TV values, which I think is really important. But to sustain a business and make money, that we have to look everywhere.
So I'm interested that both Ben and you, Bryony, seem kind of at ease, shall we say, with the nature of the internationalized industry that you're working on. Simon, do you think that we simply need to accept that the percentage of money coming from abroad is going to be higher than it once was, or do you think there needs to be some sort of intervention to reverse that, the trend that I was detailing in my talk just then?
I think you need to think about the sorts of dramas, maybe this extends to other genres as well, where there's a unique appeal to a British audience. Stories that we're telling ourselves about our culture and our politics. And some of those shows, you are not going to get the international money because they're going to go, you're speaking to yourself. Why is the US going to help to fund this? So then you have to look at what can we do. And I think the thing that's being looked at the moment is an enhanced tax credit, which would mirror what's happened in the feature film world, where shows below a certain amount will get more like 40% of a tax credit, which I think would unlock some of those British stories that aren't going to get the international finance. Admitted, we make big shows that can, draw on, they sort of organically get international finance. I mean, we made The Bombing of Pan Am 103, the BBC were the lead broadcaster, Netflix took Rest of World, they paid, a lot of money for that. We got a really good budget, but they're a rarity and they're not going to happen that often. And more the streamers want to pursue their own shows. They don't want to be in a co-pro situation.
And we've already alluded to drama several times in various answers that we've heard. Let's talk specifically about adolescence, because I remember sitting here 12 months ago, and those of you who were here last year will remember, we talked about how best to ensure British stories are told, and there was a lot of emphasis on the crucial role that PSBs play in getting those British stories out there. Fiona, do you think adolescence has changed the equation, given that very high-impact British story was made and distributed by Netflix?
I think, it's always great when a story, when a show succeeds, it's great for the talent, it's a great calling card for Britain, but, it's one show, and, the great thing is that, all us public service broadcasters, we try and have a regular beat of shows that tell British stories from right across the country, 365 days of the year. That's what we do, touching on, many companies and many jobs across the UK, and then that IP is retained in the UK. That money has a multiplier effect in the UK, and that's what we're proud of and what we're here to do for Britain.
Yeah, I think the role of the PSBs is what we should be talking about going forward, because without the PSBs being the investing in British original content and IP, as Fiona says, now the problem for the PSBs is their budgets are not going to get bigger. They can't compete with the streamers' budgets, as your presentation showed. So the question has got to be, as we go into the next phase, particularly with the charter coming up, is how much money have we got? What do we need to spend it on? One of the canaries in the coal mine, which is important, is British comedy, which doesn't sell. They don't want to commission it, it doesn't sell. British comedy is the canary in the coal mine. Now, do we still want comedy in this country? If we do, there needs to be a way to help our PSBs to invest in that very important type of genre, which matters to us, because God knows we all need a laugh now.
We're going to talk about YouTube in a minute, and I suspect Louise is going to want to talk about comedy and Channel 4 and YouTube. But before we move on beyond that...
Can I say something about adolescence?
Go on.
Which obviously it's absolutely brilliant that Netflix did that. But at Channel 4, we like to think we're proud parents of adolescents. That programme wouldn't have happened without Channel 4 and other PSBs back in. Jack Thorne and Stephen Graham did 5 dramas on Channel 4 prior to adolescence. We've nurtured the talent that allowed Netflix to then come in as TV tourists and effectively commission it. But it wouldn't have happened without the backing of PSBs.
TV tourists.
TV tourists.
You're writing the headlines yourself, Louisa.
So Netflix are like the Man City, are they?
Ben, on British stories, is it obviously the premise of this discussion is that it's on everyone within this industry to ensure British stories are told. But when you're going to work, do you think it's, at Sandland, is it part of your responsibility to tell British stories?
It's a tricky question. I mean, I'm a kind of mixed race dude who kind of the sense of Britishness and that is not necessarily my driving force in the work that I do. I'd say British stories are obviously extremely important to tell. I think there's a kind of broader question around kind of British stories and journalistic documentary content. I think it's extremely important to do. We do a lot of investigative work in the UK and around the world, which is extremely difficult to get commissioned internationally. And the kind of PSBs have historically been the places that we've gone to do that. We're now trying to do that content ourselves and trying to find a way to fund that and to reflect British society from the ground up. But yes, I do think it's extremely important. Do I think about it on a daily basis? No. I think about journalism on a daily basis. I think about how do you make sure that we're telling the truth and kind of exposing people for wrongdoing, and how do you actually make money from that? Because that's a major problem, is that the majority of kind of platforms, even the public service broadcasters, are still not prioritizing enough journalistic content on their platforms. Louisa is, Fiona is, but that still is something that doesn't do quite as well as reality TV.
And to build on that, that is what Channel 4 and the BBC and the other PSBs do that the streamers don't. Where are their kind of investigations into Gaza? I don't think, as far as I'm aware, there's not been a single film on Gaza or on Trump or on British politics. There's no current affairs on streamers. Everything they do is retrospective. They don't follow stories as they unfold. That's a unique thing that PSBs offer.
So we've looked initially at this intersection between the global TV industry and the UK TV industry. I want to look at another intersection now between what we could consider traditional TV and what we would consider video on video sharing platforms like TikTok and YouTube. I mentioned Beast Games. Bryony, are you convinced by some of the moves that we've seen from the streamers and from the broadcasters to tap into talent that is on YouTube or on TikTok or elsewhere?
I think that there is definite ambition from the broadcasters to enter this space. And I think from a creative perspective, you can absolutely see that. We've just launched a comedy thing with Channel 4, which is a British comedy, 7 British comedians. It's on a YouTube channel. That is the first of its kind. I think the ambition is there, the creative ambition is there. I think from an infrastructure perspective, in the broadcasters, they're fundamentally set up to make linear TV from the entire process, from commissioning all the way through to delivery. And when you're working on a digital budget, which is a lot less than you'd get on a linear commission, you need to be thinking about things differently. And so I don't think that fundamentally that is going to change unless it's looked at from a top-down perspective on how the whole delivery process works.
So there are broader questions about commissioning, but on a talent front,
perspective,
Fiona, as someone who's in charge of youth programming at the BBC, do you look at what's going on video sharing platforms, YouTube, TikTok, and so on, and think it would be good to get these guys more involved in our programs?
Yeah, all the time. We have a digital commissioning team in each genre, which everybody should make sure they know who in their genres their digital commissioner at the BBC is. 2 years ago we launched Creator Lab, and we had 600 UK creators apply to join our program, which was like an accelerator learning program. We worked with 100 of them in the first year. This year we've run it particularly for sports commentators, and again with hundreds of football creators apply. Niam Chowdhury won and has just got a job with BBC Sport reporting on football, having come from the creator community. So that is something we have been investing in for the past 2 years. Today, actually, we're announcing a scheme with North East Screen. It's going to be the BBC's largest digital investment in the North East, £600,000 investment for North East Indies to apply to generate a digital-first format, which can be in collaboration with a creator.
But I'm interested, if we take the BBC Sport example, and I'm not talking about that person person in particular, but essentially you've gone out into the creator community and said, well, come in and have what is actually a reasonably traditional role, as in commentary.
No, in the sense, but you're thinking of it in commentary in a linear sense. What actually he's doing is doing digital activations and in-person digital content creation that then we push out on all our social platforms, because the BBC's social platforms are huge. You know, we have many social accounts on every platform, and we're always looking at emerging platforms. So over a year ago, we launched the BBC World in Roblox, key platform for that tween teen generation, where we're showcasing EastEnders, Doctor Who, Match of the Day, and getting really strong engagement with those key BBC titles for that very young audience who are really hard for our industry to engage with. So we've been investing in that for the past 2 years, and it's shown great success with partnerships with like the EBU and Wimbledon.
And when we're talking about talent, I can think back to one conversation on the media show on Radio 4 a few months ago when they were talking about one example of a big name coming off YouTube and going onto a streamer. And they were saying, well, you're really just borrowing the audience. And then as soon as that person's not there, the audience goes away. So Ben, do you think there is value for streamers and broadcasters in tapping into the creator economy, or do you think it's just a temporary, it's a relationship that only lasts as long as that particular piece of content is there?
Yeah, I suppose the kind of idea is that people tend towards platforms, and it's tricky to move someone from Mr. Beast's YouTube to the BBC or to Amazon, and you kind of saw that to some degree in the numbers. Now, it wasn't the biggest show of all time, despite the fact that one of the biggest budgets of all time. I think for me, what's exciting about the Mr. Beast scenario is that it is reflective of the reality now that ultimately we are all effectively networks ourselves. So like historically, I would look at Fiona and Louisa and be like, these are the platforms that I can go to, and if I want to build a name for myself. The truth is now we are occasional partners and occasional competitors, and that's very, very exciting. It's slightly problematic for kind of, networks, because the landscapes are changing, the deals are changing, but for producers and for production companies, it's actually extremely positive.
Yeah.
And so if we've considered this intersection between video sharing and streamers and broadcasters from the point of view of talent, from the point of view of commissioning, I also want to talk about from the point of view of distribution. Louisa, we've got to talk about Channel 4, because you guys have been out there more than some in terms of saying we're going to put a lot of our content out there. No doubt people are watching it, but does it add up?
Yeah, I mean, we're the market leaders on YouTube, as you say. We were the first broadcaster to put full episodes on YouTube. We actually started with Dispatches several years ago. We've seen over the last year a 169% increase in people watching those full episodes. It's working. We launched.
It's working in terms of people watching it, but in terms of actually paying for the programs you make.
We've done a new deal where we can sell the adverts directly with YouTube, so we're starting to see revenue come in this way. But look, of course there are challenges working with third-party platforms. We have no control over those platforms. We've called it Channel 4 for algorithmic prominence, because the algorithms are at best shady and non-transparent. I believe public service content should be kite marked and should be given prominence on those platforms.
So you're willing to do it, but with certain conditions attached.
But it's important for us to reach audiences where they are, and they are clearly on YouTube.
Simon, are you convinced about the idea of more programming from broadcasters, even from streamers, heading to video sharing platforms?
Yeah, but potentially. I mean, I'm living in a household with 2 teenage boys, and the bloody homepage on smart TV is YouTube every time I turn it on. So that's where they go. And so they've got that, and then they go to Netflix. And if I make a show, they tend to only watch it when it comes onto Netflix. I mean, so there's a problem with that younger audience of reaching them. And if they're going to be living in a YouTube space, is there a way of putting on the first episode of a drama and to get that attention, and then saying, but if you want to watch the rest, you've got to go across to the iPlayer or to ITVX or to the Channel 4 app.
But to Ben's point, Fiona, it is notoriously difficult moving audiences from one platform to another. How do you view the BBC's challenge here, particularly with younger audiences, where clearly they are off-platform an awful lot of the time, and you would like to reach them?
The BBC has been active in YouTube for like 20 years, and we've like 30 YouTube channels, and we do a whole variety of things there, not just clips and marketing, but also long compilations. And show by show, we're often having conversations about what we will do specifically in relation to YouTube. The BBC 3 YouTube channel has been going forever. But back to Louisa's point, on our own platform, iPlayer, which was the fastest growing video service last year. I need to say that again because that's really important to people in this room who are trying to sell their shows and prove the strength of their shows to the outside market. We can control on iPlayer how much promotion a show gets, the quality, the depth of its archive. We increase personalisation on iPlayer. There's more reels on iPlayer. iPlayer can now be controlled within the nation so that audiences within the nations get more content relevant to them. We see deeper engagement time as a result of all that product development. And that is of greater business value than potentially going to a global platform where literally we have no control as to how the content's going to be presented. Never mind the onward journey.
But all of that may be, but given the data around younger audiences, given Tim Davies' commitment to universality, to use the phrase from the quote earlier, isn't the fact of the matter here that unless the BBC starts putting significantly more of its content where younger audiences are, that connection between the whole of the country and the funding model that supports the BBC is going to be broken?
There's always going to be an evolution, but our viewing hours of under 35s on iPlayer was up, which really contributed to that great performance of iPlayer last year. And that's also, and it's not just about YouTube. That's why I talk a lot about gaming, Roblox. We've done experiences in Fortnite because we do need to demonstrate to the younger audience the strength of the IP and the worlds that we have to them where they are. Borders, which is a drama, we also did a Roblox activation of that. So I totally agree we have to show the value of the BBC to these audiences when they're living more in these immersive worlds. It's not purely about YouTube, but the BBC is already incredibly active in YouTube and will be increasingly active in YouTube. Like another point today, we've put a briefing out today for 5, this is important for people in the room, for 5 documentaries which will be distributed on BBC Three, YouTube and iPlayer, and we hope that those will all be co-commissions around the UK. So it's really important that we continue to experiment in that space, which
so the BBC, as you're showing, is active on YouTube.
Yes.
But Bryony, the question is, does it need to be more active? Do the broadcasters need to share more, or does that risk undercutting the reason to go to their platforms?
I mean, from a digital, global perspective, I would say undercutting doesn't matter. I think that, they say all PR is good PR. That is true to an extent, but there is value in having your content in lots of different places. That's why we see, the Sidemen and lots of other streamers using other IP from shows that are owned by independent production companies, and obviously there's some disputes happening there, but there lots are turning a blind eye because sometimes actually that is beneficial. So I think there needs to be a move towards putting more on YouTube from all the public service broadcasters. I think there needs to be a move in terms of how that is done and how those are executed by indies. And I think there needs to be a look at what that funding model looks like that's beneficial for the producer and for the broadcaster.
Okay, so we've looked at these questions raised by the intersection of video sharing, streaming, and traditional TV. We've also thought about the increase in international funding and what that means for the New World Order, to take the phrase in the title of this session. Next, let's talk about the independent production sector, not least because what I was mentioning, which is Channel 4 setting up its own operation. When you heard about this, John, how did you and Pact feel about it?
Not very happy. I'm not sure it's going to make the difference that Channel 4 needs. The government gave them the opportunity to do it, so of course they had to look at it, and they've now moved it forward to a business plan and a process. Whether it's going to save Channel 4, it's really hard to make hits, especially if you're starting from ground zero.
Well, whether it's going to completely resolve all the issues in Channel 4's business model is a bigger question, but just in terms of the principle of Channel 4 entering the production sector.
I think it's wrong, and I still think it's wrong. I think it's a waste of time, probably a waste of money, and a waste of executive attention, when what we've just
Apart
been
from that,
talking
you're really
about,
keen on it.
But what we've just been talking about, and I think Fiona's touched on a number of things which made me think you should be Director General. We need to be changing our commissioning culture and how we think about content. Who gets it, where are they, how we do it, how we deliver it. Around the edges, setting up production isn't going to make the difference. I think it's more fundamental.
Pick up on your point firstly, we don't need saving as a start. We're in a really healthy position. We've had our strongest commercial year in the last 12 months for a number of years. We're in a good place. But on in-house production, as you touched on, it's important to remember we didn't ask for it. The government asked us to do it. We've looked at it.
No, they didn't ask you to do it. They gave you the opportunity to do it.
Yeah, and I happen to think it does make sense. And obviously, Channel 4, we think it makes sense.
Well, that's different.
Everything we do is for the indie sector. A robust and healthy Channel 4 is good for the indie sector. Remember, in an incredibly competitive world, of course we have to look at diversifying our revenue. Everything that we make through that in-house production will go back into the indie sector. We're not making this for profit. We will reinvest it in content.
Do you, Ben, running a relatively new production company, when you heard this news, did it feel relevant to the work you're doing?
Yeah, it definitely feels relevant. I suppose from a business perspective, obviously I'd prefer there to be more opportunities for Zandland at Channel 4 and for Zandland not to make its own content.
You're always going to be all right.
I'd say I generally try to think as little as humanly possible about any politics at the BBC or Channel 4 whilst I'm running a company, because
how's that going?
Well, it's actually fantastic.
Very well.
Yeah, as you know, I worked with BBC for many years, but even like the conversation around, does the BBC put content on YouTube? I don't care. It's got nothing to do with me at this point. And with in-house production, I would definitely much prefer there be more kind of opportunity. I do understand the argument in the sense of ad revenues are radically falling. Channel 4 needs some way of getting more revenue to survive as an organisation going forward. But as an independent production company, do I see that specifically pegged to the future of my business? 10%. The rest of it has to be something else.
What about you, Bryony?
So I think there's a
What
couple...
percentage are you going to put on it? Ben's saying 10% the PSPs are relevant to his business.
We make a lot of content for Channel 4 and we've made content for BBC, so probably for us it's more than 10%. But what I would say is that there's a couple of things. Bringing a production in-house, I think that the way that you make stuff for digital is intrinsically different. Like the core skill set that exists in TV is very relevant, but the pace at which we work is completely different, and our business model, production model, is set up differently. So there is that, and I think there'll need to be real thought about who is running that team to do that. And the second thing is that when you're in an indie, you have to be quite scrappy, and therefore, especially in digital, you are kind of looking at every single deal as something that can be done differently. That can be seen as very scary, or it can be seen as really exciting. And I ask the question, if you are in-house, what's the incentive to think about models differently? Independents are intrinsically set up to think about things differently to make money and make your business work.
And while we're hearing a diversity of opinions about Channel 4's decision and more broadly how the independent production sector is evolving, there is one direction of travel which is beyond dispute, which is that more people in this industry, particularly freelancers, are doing digital roles than would have been the case 5 or 10 years ago. Do you see, and I think I know the answer to this, fundamental differences in how those digital roles work versus the traditional TV roles?
Absolutely. I mean, the TV model has worked so well for such a long time, and there's a very clear hierarchy and there's a very clear direction of travel during your career. I would say in digital, that's almost completely blown out of the water, and we're having to look at things completely differently. And I know that there's a lot of discussion about having to do a lot of things in one role, and that is fundamentally true, and I think that is where we are going. But on the flip side of that, I think that's a really exciting opportunity, but almost certainly that it's a different way of working.
I think that's right, and I think that's the world we're going into. I think one of the tragedies we've seen over the past few years with the downturn in the domestic industry and also the chilling of investment coming from North America, is a lot of shows that aren't getting commissioned. That means a lot of freelancers haven't been working, and a lot of them have had to leave the industry. I think that's a tragedy. We should have been, as an industry, collectively thinking harder about that and retraining and reskilling those people to keep them in the industry, because they have cultural skills, creative skills, experience, management skills. The idea that someone who's been in the industry for 15 years is now driving for Amazon, I just think we've missed a big trick. And that's not because indies don't want to hire people, it's because they're not getting commissioned, so they can't provide the employment. So lots of people have been out of work for long periods of time, and I think it's a tragedy that the industry hasn't done more about that to try and retain that talent and reskill it for the future.
Yeah, that's very much sort of the thinking behind this Northeast Accelerator. So we're working with Northeast Screen and the combined authorities to very much launch this program, which is going to be as much about digital training and upskilling and knowledge sharing to create new digital formats that could have also some commercial potential for those indies. So it's very much an investment, as I said, £600,000 for that nation in that very point. And if that works together with it, we'd love to roll that out.
And at Channel 4, we've doubled our full skills budget to try and do what you've just talked about, which is try and retrain and reskill freelance producers.
And I'm wondering, as I'm listening to this, Simon, you work on dramas which often have significant budgets, but there will be people who work within the drama sector who at the moment aren't able to find work. Is there such thing as digital drama, or drama that is specifically aimed at video sharing platforms and is made in quite different ways to how you might make a program for a streamer or a broadcaster?
Yeah, I think there is, and I think there are examples out there. It's not straightforward. I mean, the irony is, I mean, we make a lot of high-budget drama now, but when I joined the company in the late 90s, early noughties, our specialism was making low-cost drama. And the reason behind that was because we believed that gave us creative control. We weren't going to the US for money. The commissioners tended to go, well, an example would be This Life, which is, very old, and a lot of people in the room maybe don't know it. But it was made very cheaply because it was shot in a way not unlike Adolescence, where you do very long takes, and therefore you could shoot 16, 20 minutes of material a day. And I wonder, we've started talking about, is there a world in which what kind of drama can be made at a lower cost, but you are in a world where people are expecting the kind of production values of cinema because of what the streamers are putting out there. So it's a challenge.
Okay, so we've worked through a number of things, including the independent production sector, how Channel 4 is fitting into that, and also the working experience within digital productions as well. As we head towards the end of this session, we have to get into one of the questions that is certainly going to be on the mind of the new CEO of Channel 4 whenever they are appointed, which is, we're still a few months away from that, we think?
Yeah,
Louisa?
most likely.
Yeah, most likely.
Chair first.
And we have Kate Phillips, who's replaced Charlotte Moore at the BBC. And of course, as I was mentioning earlier in my talk, there are major questions about what public service broadcasting looks like in the future, and the word merger is coming up from time to time. Fiona, do you think the BBC might be open to at least closer working relationships with some of its PSB rivals?
Well, I think there's no development of proposals or discussions or anything on the table about merger with Channel 4. I can say that. In terms of, working together, I think partnerships and working together is really key. And in terms of just skills development, investment in the nations, working with the screen agencies, we do that on an ongoing basis, and we would seek to continue developing.
What about working more closely together in how you distribute programs rather than having competing offerings?
Well, that also is going to end up being a question for the likes of BBC Studios, who, are core to distribution as well of platforms. So, but I would just say, that is not something that's on the table right now at all.
Fancy a merger, Louisa?
No, absolutely not.
Exactly.
Diversity.
Louisa and I are very good friends, but we don't need to merge.
Well, now there's a thought. No, look, diversity is strength. The beauty about the TV ecosystem is to have a number of PSBs. And you've got to look at, to me, the perfect example of why we shouldn't merge is our recent Gaza Doctors Under Attack, which obviously the BBC Commission decided not to show for their own reasons, and we were able to show it. And I think that speaks exactly why we need a strong.
But the people who are talking about mergers aren't saying they don't like the beauty of the PSB environment as it's been. They're just saying it doesn't add up.
Well,
Yeah, but
it's working pretty well for us.
creative diversity is really important.
Yeah.
I have ideas I might develop for Channel 4,
Yeah.
which ITV won't like. I have ideas I might develop for Channel 5, which the BBC won't like. Although Play for Today seems to be quite a good one. And so I think it's really, now it's not about merger, it's about how do we sustain that diversity, because we need the cultural diversity to bring different voices and different people into our TV world. If we reduce it, it's bad for, not only bad for producers, it's bad for society. It's bad
We spent part of this conversation talking about the concern about globalisation. We can't on the one hand be concerned about that and then talk about PSB's merging. That diversity is incredibly important.
But I haven't heard anyone who's saying this doesn't look viable, saying I don't want creative diversity, that's the last thing I want. They're not arguing that, they're saying...
It would inevitably lead to that.
Yeah.
But they're saying that actually the market doesn't look like it can support the current funding of the different PSBs don't look collectively viable. Ben?
I mean, as an independent production company who really values the kind of concept of public service broadcasting, I'd say I'd also love to see a kind of a public service fund for independent companies. I think part of the problem is people are engaging significantly less with the BBC and Channel 4, which means that public service content that is extremely important and people should be paying attention to is not being seen by young audiences. This is, as part of...
But how would a fund like that help?
because we could pitch into that and then make public service content and put it on our channels. Or
you-
because there's the thing that increasingly we are networks ourselves. We have to be able to make content. There has to be more in terms of creative diversity. Individuals should be able to pitch into those funds and make content on their YouTube channels or on TikTok.
Do you see the people that you're commissioning, Fiona, to make programs also as rivals, or do you see them as networks who are...
No, definitely networks. You know, we're all stronger together because we're in this in a global market. You know, the BBC works with and supports a lot of smaller indies through the Small Indie Fund, many of which are you know, out of London as well. It's just you know, it's really important that we all work together to find those stories, to get the stories made, because the BBC's platform, and lots of indies who I will talk to about their individual commissions, when your show gets hero promo, like at the minute, you know, Firecrest, The Missing Cyclist, Double Acts, Confessions of a Steroid Gang, I've got top promotion on iPlayer. They're getting that on IPTV and like the Virgin or the Sky promotion of the BBC. That is worth a hell of a lot of money to those companies to try and showcase their IP as they try and sell it, as opposed to a small channel of their own.
The industry is fundamentally changing though. Yeah. So I think like we're having a conversation here which is completely directed to the TV industry, which makes sense because we're a TV festival. But the majority of youngsters coming through don't really care that much about whether it's on TV, whether it's on the BBC. They're not really paying attention to independent production companies. They're just thinking content is on the internet. I'm discovering it on YouTube. I'm discovering it on TikTok. So it's finding a way to get content in front of them.
Which is why we have our Roblox World, for example, for that very, very point.
And finally on this issue, Simon, I want to ask you, we're hearing strong cases from a number of our colleagues here for the creative diversity that the current array of PSBs offers. When you look at that array and you hear the case being made that this is how it should be in the new world order, do you see sufficiently distinct offerings from Channel 4, from the other PSBs that make you think, yeah, this justifies that argument?
I think, look, I came into an industry where you could only really pitch to two places, as an indie, BBC and Channel 4. ITV were pretty stitched up back in the early 90s. So it's fantastic that there is an array of different platforms that can make drama. So I wouldn't want that to diminish. The question we seem to slightly have swerved is Channel 4 financially viable? We don't want it to merge, but if the finances don't stack up, then it closes, you know, and obviously the last government tried to privatise.
And clearly, Louisa is saying that it is, and with 8 minutes on the clock, perhaps we can't fully open up the.
But if it is, that's
Channel
great.
4's finances.
Keep
but
it going.
Even if it was financially viable, do you see Channel 4 offering the necessary creative diversity, to use the phrase that's come up a number of times, to justify that PSB along with all the other PSBs?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it's a challenge because Channel 4 has to justify itself by bringing in an audience, but also by representing diverse voices and new talents. And I think there's always a pendulum at Channel 4, and I've been making shows for 25 years, where it goes between we've got to chase an audience and now we've got to chase a particular niche.
I've got two last questions for you in the last few minutes of this panel. Those of you here may well be aware that this is the 50th anniversary of the Edinburgh TV Festival. In a minute, I'm going to ask our panel to pick their favourite show of the last 50 years, and they have been given some notice on this. But before I do that, everyone here in their different roles and their different organisations is wrestling with what we're calling the new world order. We're all trying to plot a way through an ever-changing industry. If people leaving the room now have to bear in mind one thing about the New World Order that will help as they navigate this world, what would you offer them?
I think Ben summed it up. If you're an indie, you have to be diversified. You have to be exploring every single way to take your IP to market through whatever channel. My problem for that is Ben's a successful and established company. My problem is if you're a startup and you want to set up a network on YouTube and you want to make content, where's the money? Our business used to be we'd come up with an idea and sell it to the broadcasters who'd give us the money to make it. Now we've got to come up with the money ourselves. Well, I think there's a problem there because not everyone's got bank and mum and dad or are trustafarians. So I think there's a problem with diversity and inclusion coming down the track where there's a lot of people who probably would get into our industry previously who may now be excluded. And I think that's a big issue for our whole industry to start talking about.
Fiona, your one thing that people should take away.
I think when you have the essence of your idea, be it a world, be it a character, be it a point of view, think big in terms of what are all the touch points that you can launch those stories on. And that's as much about platforms and worlds and experiences beyond the BBC, back to Roblox.
So you have diversity of revenue streams, diversity of touch points. Bryony?
I would say if you are a producer or a freelancer sitting in this room and you don't know where to start, I think it's a really exciting opportunity to work differently, upskill. I hope that in the next few years there's going to be some really exciting work with the broadcasters, with Pact, in terms of developing how that looks. And I think this is an opportunity, and now is the time to understand what digital is doing, understand how your skill set is relevant. We have had some of the best people work on shows for us, for Channel 4, for JD Sport. We haven't talked about brands as commissioners, but it's a whole other conversation. And they are absolutely incredible. It's just about flipping that mindset slightly to work in the way that we work. So I think it's an exciting opportunity.
Thank you very much. Louisa?
I was going to kind of say what Fiona said, so I'll say something slightly different, which is, I guess, look, in a world in which frequently feels it's turned on its axis, the boundary between truth and lies feels fuzzy at best. The importance of telling stories, telling British stories, telling stories that matter, holding to account, and Channel 4 more committed to that than ever before.
Just to quickly say, actually, I definitely think Channel 4 should exist. I think they're doing some of the most kind of groundbreaking thinking.
Just wanted to clear that up.
Yeah, just to clear that up.
Any,
just because that came up.
Okay, you're still
But I think we're kind of entering an age.
You guys can carry this on after, after the
I
panel.
think we're entering an age of like kind of super entrepreneurialship with production companies. You really do need to think outside the box, and that point is a prime example, which is it's very difficult if you're coming up and you don't necessarily have the bank of mum and dad, which we didn't. But at the same time, digital content doesn't always need to be insanely expensive, so there's ways you can think around that. So I'd say there is a huge amount of risk, but there is now a significant amount of reward. If you can build an audience and you can monetize that audience, previously you were a producer working with the BBC or Channel 4, now you can be an empire.
Finally, Simon.
Two things. Nobody knows anything. That. You know, another platform turned down adolescence. Remember that. Always hold on to that. Yeah, I mean, I've forgotten the thing I was going to say now.
Well, nobody knows that. Nobody knows anything.
There
Is
you
a
go,
useful thing to take away. All right, let's get to the final question, which is your favourite.
Oh, I know what I was going
Go
to say. Sorry, I will say. In 2008, everybody told me that drama was dead.
Yeah.
So that's perspective.
Yeah.
There's always upswings, there's downswings.
Yeah.
We keep going.
Everything is figure-outable.
Yeah. And in the final 2 minutes, let's get to the question that all of you are going to be asked in different ways across this festival. Your favourite TV show or series from the last 50 years. I'm going to go for Pennies from Heaven. John, what about you?
Well, it kept me up half the night. Father Ted.
All right, interested.
The Kenny Everett Show, because I loved him when I was at school.
The Good Life.
The Good Life.
Queer as Folk.
Okay.
Really random, but The Vicar of Dibley.
Oh, yeah, that was my other one, yeah.
Didn't see that coming, if I'm honest, Ben.
It's
But
so not what we expected from you.
that's a hard act to follow, Simon. What are you going to go for?
Our friends in the north.
Yeah.
I just, yeah, it made me want to be a drama producer.
Thank you very much indeed for all of those answers. Thanks indeed for sharing so much of your expertise with us. Please join me in thanking our panel.